Vanessa held the hem of my wedding dress between two fingers like it was something she'd found stuck to her shoe. "Be honest, Grace," she said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. "How much was this thing?" $200 from a catalog. The room laughed. My new husband stared at his plate, and I smiled because I was the only person in that dining room who knew the truth. That dress had a name most brides could never afford to whisper. It came from a boutique Vanessa had bragged about for 3 years. The same boutique where she'd spent a small fortune trying to look like money she didn't have. She just didn't know one thing yet. She didn't know who owned it. I let her laugh. I always let people laugh first. Tells you exactly who they are before they find out who you are. And there was a receipt with her name on it, sitting in a drawer in my office, that would one day answer every joke she'd ever made. I just wasn't ready to hand it to her yet. To understand why I stayed quiet that night, you have to understand where I came from, and where the Hollisters thought they came from. I grew up in a rented duplex outside Akron. My mother cleaned houses for women who never learned her last name. My father fixed transmissions until his hands stopped closing all the way. We were not poor in the way that makes a good story. We were poor in the ordinary way, the way where the lights stay on but the account never grows, where every good thing you own was bought, used, and made to last. I learned to sew because new clothes were a luxury and torn ones were a fact. By 14 I could take a thrift store dress apart at the seams and rebuild it into something a girl at school would ask me where I bought. I never told them. I liked the secret. There is a quiet power in letting people believe you have more than you do, and an even quieter one in letting them believe you have less. When I met Daniel Hollister, I was 29 and already building something. He didn't know that either. He knew a woman named Grace who managed her own schedule, drove a sensible car, and never talked about work at dinner. His family liked that I was humble. That was the word Patricia, his mother, used. Humble. She said it the way you describe a dog that doesn't jump on the furniture. A compliment with a leash on it. The Hollisters had a name in their county. 3 generations of a plumbing supply company, a lake house that needed a new roof they kept postponing, and the unshakable belief that they were old money. They were not. They were comfortable money pretending to be old, which is the most fragile kind because it has to be defended every single day. And no one defended it harder than Daniel's sister. Vanessa was 2 years younger than me, and had never earned a dollar she didn't inherit or borrow. She'd married a man named Todd Pierce, a regional sales director who was doing fine and behaving like he was doing spectacular. Together they lived at the exact edge of their income and 1 foot over it. Leased cars, a kitchen renovated on credit, a closet full of labels bought to be photographed, not worn. From the first dinner, Vanessa decided who I was. The girl from Akron. The one who sewed. She'd ask me to hem her curtains at family gatherings in front of everyone, and laugh when I said I was busy. Busy with what? She'd say. Nobody at that table could have guessed the answer. Not one of them. And I had made very sure of that. I want you to understand why a woman would stay silent about her own success in a family like that. It wasn't fear. It was strategy, and it was a kind of self-protection I'd learned young. When you tell people you have money, they start looking for reasons you don't deserve it. They audit your accent, your table manners, the way you hold a fork, and they find 100 small ways to tell you that you're a guest in a world you bought your way into. I'd watched it happen to a woman at my own store, a self-made trucking magnate who spent $40,000 on a gown and still got treated like she'd wandered in by mistake. I decided a long time ago that I would never hand anyone that particular weapon. Let them think I came from nothing. It's easier to build in a room where no one is watching your hands. So I let Vanessa build her whole opinion of me on a foundation she never checked. And the thing I was busy with, the thing she'd have given anything to know about, had Vanessa's own credit card number on file. I opened the first store when I was 26, 3 years before I ever met Daniel. I called it Avellini. I chose the name because it sounded like it had always existed, like it belonged to a family in France with a crest and a history. There was no family. There was me, a leased storefront in a good part of the city, 11 dresses I had sewn myself, and a business loan I'd signed for with a stomach full of acid. I did not put my name on the door. I registered the company under a holding entity, Callahan and Reed, using my mother's maiden name and a lawyer's suggestion. At the time it was about liability and taxes. Later it became the most important decision I ever made, though I couldn't have known why. I built a brand that had no visible face. The women who shopped there talked about Avellini like a place, not a person. That was exactly what I wanted. The first year nearly ended me. I remember standing in the back room in December, looking at inventory I couldn't move, doing math that didn't work no matter how many times I ran it. I had $11,000 in the business account and a lease payment that would take 9 of it. I sold my car and started taking the bus so I wouldn't have to lay off the one seamstress I'd hired. Her name was Margaret. She's still with me. She would become the woman who years later quietly told me everything Vanessa did in my store. What saved me wasn't luck. It was a bride. A surgeon's daughter walked in 3 days before her wedding after another boutique ruined her gown. I stayed up 2 nights rebuilding it by hand. She cried when she saw herself. Then she did the thing that changes everything in a business like mine. She told people. Not just anyone. The kind of people who have weddings written about. Within 18 months Avellini had a waiting list. Within 4 years I had 2 locations and a name that carried weight in rooms I was never invited into. There's a thing that happens to a business when it survives its first near death. Gets a spine. I stopped chasing every customer and started choosing them. I raised prices instead of lowering them, and the waiting list got longer because that's the strange arithmetic of luxury. People don't want what everyone can have. I learned to read a bride in the first 90 seconds, to know who needed the dress to feel loved and who needed it to feel superior, and I built a company that could serve both without ever confusing the two. Margaret used to say I could smell insecurity through a phone line. She wasn't entirely wrong. It's a skill you develop when you grow up being the poorest person in every room. You learn to read the people above you because your survival depends on it. Later, that same skill is what lets you outlast them. By the time I met Daniel, Avellini was doing 7 figures a year and I owned it outright. I had paid off the loan, bought the building the flagship stood in, and opened a 3rd location in the very county where the Hollisters lived. That was the store Vanessa shopped at. That was the store she bragged about. She would post photos from the fitting room, tag the location, and write things like, when you know. She was standing in a room I built, wearing dresses I approved, spending money she was borrowing, and telling the world it made her better than a girl from Akron who sewed. I never corrected her. Not once. Because I had learned something a long time ago. Standing in my mother's borrowed kitchen. The people who need you to be small are always keeping a ledger. And someday someone reads it back to them. Margaret ran the county store, and Margaret kept records the way some people keep faith. Every client, every fitting, every account. She didn't know Vanessa was my sister-in-law for the first year, because I'd asked her never to discuss family and never to give me a reason to. But she knew the name Hollister Pierce well before I ever mentioned it, because that name generated more paperwork than any 3 other clients combined. Vanessa had what we call a house account. It let a client take a dress, wear it, and settle later. We offered it to a small circle of women whose credit and history we trusted. Vanessa had talked her way onto that list before I married into the family, using the Hollister name and a down payment that cleared. For a while she paid. Late, but she paid. Then the pattern started, the one Margaret flagged in a quiet email I still have. She'd buy a gown for an event, wear it with the tags tucked in, and return it 3 days later claiming it didn't fit right. She did this 11 times in 1 year. 11. A $4,000 dress for a charity gala, worn in photographs I could find online, returned the following Monday with makeup on the collar and a story about the shoulders. My staff, not knowing who she was to me, kept absorbing it, Because the Hollister name still meant something and because I train my people to be gracious before they are suspicious. I want to be clear about what this is because it's easy to laugh it off as a woman being cheap. It isn't cheap. It's theft dressed in a nice coat. It's the same instinct as the man who eats the meal and complains to avoid the check. The same instinct as the contractor who bills for work he never did. It's a person who has decided the rules are for people without the right last name. And I was watching it happen inside my own company, done by the same woman who called my wedding dress a catalog special. Here is the part that still turns my stomach a little. During the same year she was quietly draining my store. She stood in Patricia's kitchen at Thanksgiving and told the family I probably got my dress at an outlet. She said it kindly. That was her gift. She could insult you while sounding concerned. There's no shame in it, Grace. Not everyone can afford nice things. Daniel's cousins nodded along. Patricia patted my hand. And I sat there holding a glass of wine doing something none of them could see. I was calculating exactly how much of my own money Vanessa had spent that year pretending to be better than me. I did wrestle with it, in case you're wondering whether I was made of stone. There were nights I wanted to end the game early, to slide the file across Patricia's table, and watch the room rearrange itself. But I kept coming back to the same cold truth. If I exposed Vanessa too soon, while she still had allies in a story, she'd find a way to make me the villain. The jealous in-law. The one who attacked family over money. I'd seen it happen to honest people 100 times, watched a liar cry first and win the room by doing it. So I waited for the version of events that couldn't be spun. I waited for Vanessa to do something so clearly, provably wrong that no amount of tears could paint it as my cruelty. She was building toward it on her own. I didn't have to push. I only had to keep the records and keep my mouth shut, which, if you've ever had to do it, you know is the hardest work there is. The number, if you're wondering, was just over $31,000. 19 of it still unpaid. I knew that number the way you know a scar. And I said nothing because it wasn't time. You don't pull a thread until the whole thing is ready to come apart in one clean motion. Vanessa was still weaving. I was just watching her hands. The wedding was 6 months out when Vanessa appointed herself its unofficial critic. She had opinions about the venue, which she called quaint. A word she used the way a knife uses its edge. She had opinions about the guest list, the flowers, and most of all, the dress. My dress. The one she assumed I would buy off a rack somewhere and be grateful for. What she didn't know was that I had made my own. I'd started it in the private atelier above the flagship, the room where I still sew when the world gets loud. I used silk I'd sourced myself, a bodice I built over 4 months, hand-stitched work that would have listed at $18,000 if it ever touched a showroom floor. It would never carry a price because it wasn't for sale. It was mine. The last dress I ever expected to make was my own, and I made it in secret the way I'd done everything that mattered in my life. Vanessa cornered me at a bridal shower Patricia hosted. She'd had 2 glasses of wine and the confidence that comes with someone else's money. I have connections, you know, she told me, leaning in like she was doing me a favor. There's this boutique Avellini. Impossible to get into. But I'm practically family there. I could get you a fitting. They'd have to take you if I asked. She actually said that. She offered to get me into my own store as a favor. I looked at her for a long moment. Long enough that a smarter woman would have felt the floor shift. Then I thanked her. I said I'd think about it. Inside, something went very still and very calm, the way water does right before it freezes. Because in that sentence, Vanessa had shown me the whole of who she was. She would take from me with one hand and offer me scraps of my own life with the other, and feel generous doing it. I understand the temptation to think this is just family drama. Everyone has a Vanessa, the relative who keeps score, who needs you beneath them. But sit with what she was actually doing. She was borrowing against her own family's name to steal from a business, then using the reputation of that same business to humiliate the very person who owned it. If you built that as a plan, it would be too cruel to believe. She didn't build it. She just followed her nature, one small cruelty at a time, the way water finds the crack in a foundation. There was a moment, standing there with Vanessa's wine breath and her generous little offer, where I almost told her. The words were right there. I own it, Vanessa. I own Avellini. You've been shopping in my store for 3 years. I could have watched her whole face fall through the floor. But I've learned that the sentence you most want to say is almost always the one you should hold. A truth spoken to win an argument is spent forever. A truth held becomes leverage, and leverage, unlike satisfaction, keeps its value. So I swallowed it, the way I'd swallowed 100 of Vanessa's little cruelties, and I filed it next to the others. My mother used to say that patience is just anger that decided to be useful. I never understood that until I married into the Hollisters. Patricia found us and put an arm around Vanessa. She's just looking out for you, Grace, she said. You're lucky to have a sister like her. I smiled and agreed. Lucky. I said the word out loud and it didn't cost me anything, because I already knew how this ended. I just hadn't decided when. What I didn't know yet was that Vanessa was about to make a decision far more reckless than mocking a dress. She was about to try to steal from me directly. And this time she'd sign her name to it. The money problems I'd watched from a distance were closing in on Vanessa faster than her performance could hide. I knew because of Margaret, and I knew because of something more ordinary. Todd's company restructured. His region shrank. The commission checks that had floated their entire life got smaller and then irregular, and the leased cars and the credit kitchen and the labels all kept demanding to be fed. Most people, faced with that, do the quiet, painful thing. They downsize. They tell the truth to someone. They eat the humiliation because the alternative is worse. I have deep respect for the people who do that. I've watched clients cancel $40,000 weddings with more dignity than Vanessa ever showed at a dinner table. There is no shame in a life getting smaller. The shame is in what you're willing to do to hide it. Vanessa did not downsize. She doubled down. She started telling people Todd had been promoted. She booked a 10th anniversary gala for herself, 120 guests at a country club her family didn't belong to, and she needed a gown for it. Naturally, she came to Avellini, to my county store, to settle a $19,000 past due balance by adding to it. Margaret called me the night Vanessa came in. Not the boutique line. My personal cell. She told me Vanessa had selected a gown off the couture rail, one of only 3 we'd ever cut in that pattern, and asked to put it on her house account. When Margaret, following the policy I'd written myself, explained gently that the account would need to be brought current first, Vanessa did something that told me she had crossed from desperate into dangerous. She got quiet, smiled, and said, "Do you know who my family is? Do you want me to call the owner? Because I'm close with them. Very close. One word from me and you're done here." Margaret, who has worked for me for 11 years and knows exactly who the owner is, said, "I'd be happy to speak with the owner about it, ma'am." And Vanessa, not hearing the trap in her own bluff, said, "You do that. Tell them Vanessa Hollister Pierce is not someone you make wait." Then she took the gown on a hold she had no intention of honoring and left. Margaret ended the call to me with one sentence. "Grace, she's telling clients you're a personal friend of hers. And she's about to do something with that dress." There's a specific kind of anger that arrives when someone threatens a person who works for you. Margaret had stayed with me through the year I couldn't pay myself. She'd taken the bus with me. She'd rebuilt gowns at 2 in the morning without complaint. And Vanessa, who had never earned a thing, had looked at that woman across the counter and told her she'd have her fired with a phone call. That she was close with the owner. I think that was the moment my patience finally turned into something with a spine. Not the mockery. Not the dress. The moment my sister-in-law tried to use my own name as a club against someone I loved. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after that. Daniel was asleep upstairs. My phone glowed on the counter. And for the first time in 3 years I stopped waiting. Not out of anger. Anger is loud and stupid and it makes mistakes. What I felt was colder and more useful. It was the feeling of a woman who has finally been handed the last thread. Vanessa had used my name to threaten my own employee. Whatever she did next, she would do it on paper in my building with cameras running. And I would let her. The wedding came first. I want to tell you about that day because it's where Vanessa performed her cruelty in front of the most people, and where I made the choice that decided everything after. I wore the dress I'd made. When I came down the aisle, there was a sound in the room, that small collective breath a beautiful thing pulls out of people before they can be polite about it. I saw Patricia's hand go to her chest. I saw Daniel's eyes fill. And I saw Vanessa 3 rows back doing math on her face. She knew clothing. She spent her life pretending to. And some part of her recognized what she was looking at, even if she couldn't admit it. That dress was not from an outlet. That dress was not a catalog. That dress was better than anything hanging in her own closet. And she knew it in the place where she kept the truth she never said out loud. She couldn't let it stand. At the reception during the toast, she found her moment. She stood, glass in hand, uninvited to speak, and made her little performance. I just want to say, she began warm as poison. That Grace has taught us all something about being resourceful. She proves you don't need to spend a lot to feel special. A ripple of confused laughter. And that dress, honey, I don't care what anyone says, you wear it so well. Then the line I quoted you at the start, delivered as she reached over and pinched the fabric. How much was this thing? $200 from a catalog. Here is what I did. Nothing. I smiled and thanked her for the toast and let the moment pass. Daniel started to stand, his face red, and I put my hand on his arm and shook my head, because I understood something Vanessa never would. The person who explains themselves in that moment has already lost. If I'd stood up and announced that the dress was worth more than her car, that I'd made it myself, that I owned the boutique she worshipped, I would have become exactly what she needed me to be. Loud. Defensive. Small. Instead, I let her have the room. I let her think she'd won. I have never regretted a silence more perfectly spent. I've thought a lot about why she needed to do it at my wedding, of all places. And I think it's because a wedding is the one day the woman she decided to look down on gets to be the center of the room. Vanessa couldn't stand a version of the world where I was, even for an afternoon, the most important person present. She had to pull me back down to the size she'd assigned me. People like her aren't cruel because they're strong. They're cruel because they're terrified every waking hour of being ordinary. And nothing terrifies a person who's faking wealth like being in a room with someone who has it and doesn't need to say so. Because silence isn't surrender. People confuse the two constantly. Silence is a decision to let the truth arrive on its own schedule, with more weight than any speech could carry. Vanessa sat down glowing, sure she'd put the Akron girl in her place one final time, at the girl's own wedding. She had no idea she'd just given her toast 3 feet from a woman who was, at that very moment, deciding to stop protecting her. My gift to Vanessa was patience. And she was about to spend the last of it. 2 weeks after the wedding, Vanessa executed the thing Margaret had warned me about. She took the couture gown she'd put on hold, the one from the rail we'd only cut 3 times, and she wore it to her anniversary gala. Photographed head to toe. Tagged, of course, at my store. When you know, you know. 120 guests. Then for days later she brought it back. She brought it back claiming it was defective. She said the beading had come loose during one wear, that the gown was clearly damaged goods, and she demanded a full refund credited against her account, plus, and I promise you this is true, an additional store credit for her inconvenience. She had worn an $11,000 gown to her own gala for free, and was now trying to be paid for the privilege. And because the balance she owed was $19,000, a full refund plus credit would have wiped most of her debt and handed her cash on top. This is the part where I need you to see it clearly, because it's the part that stops being family pettiness and becomes something with a name. What Vanessa did has a name in every state. It's fraud. Wardrobing, the retail world calls it, when someone buys, wears, and returns for a refund. But she went further. She fabricated a defect, made a written claim, and used a family relationship she'd invented to pressure an employee. That's not a woman being tacky. That's a person filing a false claim for money, in writing on camera, with a paper trail she created herself. Margaret did everything right. She'd photographed the gown at pickup, pristine. She had the security footage of the fitting. She had the online photos of Vanessa in the gown at the gala timestamped. She had the return, with makeup at the collar and a wine stain on the hem that no manufacturing defect ever left. And she had the written refund demand signed. Vanessa Hollister Pierce, in her own confident hand, had documented her own crime and slid it across the counter, certain that the family name would make it disappear the way it always had. I need you to sit with the arithmetic of what she'd done, because this is where a lot of people would still make excuses for her, and I don't want you to. She wore an $11,000 gown to a party she threw to convince 120 people she was thriving. She got the photographs. She got the compliments, though when you know, you know. And then she tried to make my company pay her for it, and to erase the $19,000 she already owed, and to walk away with cash on top. That is not a woman who's fallen on hard times and cut a corner to survive. I have endless compassion for that woman. This was something else. This was a person who had decided that the people around her were resources to be drained, and that the only sin was getting caught. She'd been getting away with small versions of it her whole life. She simply never understood that a paper trail doesn't care about your last name. Margaret called me and asked one question. How do you want me to handle this one? She'd handled 100 difficult returns without me. She was asking because she'd finally connected every thread, and she wanted to know if the owner wanted to be a sister-in-law or a business. I told her to process nothing, approve nothing, deny nothing yet. Keep every record, keep it polite, and tell Vanessa the claim was under review by ownership. Those 3 words. Under review by ownership. I wanted Vanessa to spend a few days imagining a stranger in a corner office reading her file. She had no idea the owner had been at her family's Thanksgiving table for 3 years, holding a glass of wine doing math. I did not want revenge the way movies sell it. I want to be honest about that because it matters. I didn't lie awake plotting a public humiliation. What I wanted was simpler and harder. I wanted the truth to stand up in a room where it couldn't be laughed off. And I wanted to be the one holding it. There's a difference between wanting someone to suffer and wanting them to finally be seen. I only ever wanted the second one. The first takes care of itself. So I did the thing that was both fair and devastating. I let the process be exactly what it would be for any customer who did what Vanessa did. I had my operations director, a man named Reed who Vanessa had never met, send her a formal letter on Avellini letterhead. It laid out the findings plainly. The gown showed evidence of wear consistent with the photographs from her event. The claim defect was not supported. The refund was denied. The outstanding balance of $19,200 remained due, and given the documented pattern of worn returns over the prior 2 years, her house account was closed and the matter referred to the company's counsel for collection. No insults. No triumph. Just the facts a business states when a person has finally done something a business can't absorb. I could have made it personal. I chose to make it accurate instead, which is worse for people like Vanessa, because accuracy has no emotion to argue with. You can fight a person who's angry at you. You can't fight a ledger. I need to say something to you directly here because if you've stayed with me this long, you're probably someone who has swallowed a Vanessa or 2 in your own life. The relative who keeps you small. The coworker who takes credit. The person who mistakes your patience for weakness. And I know how tired that makes you, how many nights you've rehearsed the speech you'll never give. If you've made it this far with me, I want to invite you to subscribe to our channel and join us every day. Because these stories aren't really about revenge. They're about the quiet moment when a person stops apologizing for taking up space. And I have one more turn to show you, the one where Vanessa found out. And I'll tell you the truth about the CTA I just gave you because I don't like when people do it and pretend they didn't. I'm asking you to subscribe not because I need a number, but because I know from the comments on these stories that most of you are carrying one of these situations right now. Quietly. The way I carried mine. You have a folder of your own somewhere, real or in your head, full of the things you never said. And you're wondering if you're a coward for staying calm. You're not. Choosing your moment isn't weakness. It's the discipline that separates the people who get even from the people who get free. Stay with me because the difference between those two is the whole point of what happened next. The letter reached her on a Tuesday. By Wednesday she'd done exactly what I expected. She called the store furious and demanded one more time to speak to the owner. She was done being handled by staff. She wanted the person in charge. Margaret, calm as still water, told her the owner had reviewed the file personally and would be willing to meet in person that Sunday at Patricia's house. Vanessa agreed before she understood what she'd agreed to. I didn't arrange the Sunday meeting to ambush Vanessa. Patricia had already planned a family lunch, the whole Hollister clan, the way she did once a month. I simply told Daniel I was ready to tell his family what I did for a living. He'd known for a while by then. I told him the night after the wedding quietly in our kitchen, and he'd sat down slowly and said, "You own Avellini. Vanessa's Avellini." Then he'd laughed, not cruelly, just at the size of it. He asked me why I'd never said anything. I told him the truth, because the day I told them was a day I could never take back, and I wanted to be sure the person I told it to was someone I could trust with it. By then he was. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't want to manage it or spend it or stand a little taller because of it. He just held my hand across the counter and said, "You did all of that alone." Not a question. And I realized that was the first time in 3 years anyone in that family had seen the whole of me and not tried to make it smaller. That's how I knew he was safe. That's how I knew it was time. So that Sunday I walked into Patricia's dining room, the same room where Vanessa had pinched my dress and called it a catalog special, and I sat down with a plain folder in front of me. Vanessa was already there, still hot about the owner who denied her refund, telling the table about the nightmare she'd been dealing with at her boutique. She was mid-sentence describing how she was practically a partner there, when Patricia asked me to pass the bread and said offhand, "Grace dear, you should have Vanessa take you sometime. You could use a nice dress." The table chuckled. The old joke. The Akron girl and her catalog. I passed the bread. Then I opened the folder. I did it gently, the way you'd open a door for someone who doesn't know what room they're walking into. I laid 3 things on the table. A photograph of the couture gown, pristine at pickup. A screenshot of Vanessa wearing it at her gala. And the refund demand in her handwriting, claiming it was defective. And I said, in a voice no louder than I'd used to ask about the weather, "Vanessa, the owner reviewed your file." I'm the owner. I've been the owner the whole time. I have played that sentence back in my head more times than I'll admit. I'm the owner. I've been the owner the whole time. For seconds of words to undo 3 years of a story. And the strange thing is that I felt no rush of triumph saying it. What I felt was tired, the specific tiredness of a person setting down something heavy they've carried so long they'd stop noticing the weight. I didn't say it to win. I said it because I was done pretending to be smaller than I was for the comfort of people who'd never once wondered what it cost me. The room did the thing rooms do when the floor gives way. Silence, then the sound of everyone understanding at once. Patricia looked at the photographs, then at me, then at her daughter, and her face changed in a way I'll remember for the rest of my life. Not because I enjoyed it. Because I watched a mother realize in real time which of the 2 women at her table had been telling the truth. Every joke about the catalog dress, every "you're lucky to have a sister like her." Every time she'd patted my hand and called me humble, all of it was rearranging itself behind her eyes into a shape she didn't want to look at. Vanessa opened her mouth. For once in her life, nothing came out. What happened next was quiet, and quiet is what makes it stay with people. Vanessa didn't scream. She didn't flip the table. She did the thing that cornered people do when the story they've told for years collapses in one motion. She reached for the last version of it. "This is a misunderstanding," she said. "Grace, why would you do this to family? In front of everyone?" She turned to the table, hunting for the alliance that had always been there. "She's twisting it. She's always been jealous of me. And here is where the years of silence paid what they owed. Because I didn't have to argue. I didn't have to raise my voice or defend myself or perform my hurt. The folder did it for me." Patricia, who had spent 3 years calling me humble and lucky, picked up the refund demand and read it herself, in her daughter's handwriting, and set it back down like it was hot. Todd, sitting beside Vanessa, had gone the color of ash, because he was learning several things at once, including that the promotion and the anniversary gala and the family's finances were built on the same sand as the defective dress claim. It all came apart in the same 3 minutes, because it had all been the same lie wearing different dresses. I said one more thing and only one. I told the table the number. $31,000 spent at my store over 2 years, 19 still owed, most of it on gowns worn once and returned. I said it without cruelty, the way you read a total off a receipt. Then I closed the folder. I told Vanessa the balance was now with counsel and it would be handled like any other account, no better and no worse, and that she was welcome always to family lunches, because I don't punish people by taking their family. I just stop protecting them from the truth. Then I asked Patricia to pass the potatoes. Todd left the table at some point. I heard the back door. I didn't watch him go, but I understood it, because a man doesn't stay in a room while the last support beam of his life is being calmly removed in front of his in-laws. I felt something for him, oddly. He'd been a passenger in Vanessa's performance, half believing it himself, and now he was going to spend a very long night learning how much of his life was set decoration. That's the thing about the lies people like Vanessa tell. They never fall on the liar alone. There's always a Todd. There's always a Patricia who vouched for them. That's why I stopped feeling guilty about the folder a long time before I ever opened it. I didn't build the debt or wear the gown or sign the false claim. I just refused, finally, to keep being the quiet place where the truth went to die. I want you to notice what I did not do. I did not gloat. I did not demand an apology, because an apology extracted by force is worth nothing and I had no use for it. I did not tell the Akron story to make them feel guilty for the years of small cruelties. I let one folder do what 1,000 arguments couldn't. And the reason it worked, the reason it will always work, is that the truth doesn't need volume. It needs a witness. That Sunday, the whole family became the witness. Vanessa had built her entire standing on being the one who looked down. And she'd done it every single day, standing inside a house I built, unaware that the woman she pitted held the deed. The dress she called a catalog special had cost more than her gala gown. And the gala gown, it turned out, she'd never really owned at all. Vanessa paid the balance eventually. Not all at once and not graciously, but she paid it, the way you finally pay a debt when there's no name left to hide behind. Todd's finances came into the open the way these things do, and they downsized, the thing she'd been terrified of, and the sky did not fall. Last I heard, they were doing better. There is a strange mercy in losing the thing you were spending everything to protect. When you can no longer afford to pretend, you sometimes find out who you actually are. I hope she did. Patricia called me a few weeks later. She didn't apologize in words exactly. People of her generation and her pride rarely do. What she said was, "I always wondered how you afforded that wedding dress." And I told her the truth, that I made it myself in a room above a store I own over 4 months with my own hands. There was a long pause on the line. Then she said, "Your mother must be proud." And I had to sit down because in 3 years that was the first time anyone in that family had mentioned my mother without it being a joke about where I came from. "Daniel and I are fine. Better than fine." He never once treated my success like a threat, which is the whole reason I could finally tell it. Vanessa and I are civil now, in the careful way of people who both know exactly what the other is capable of. She's never mocked a dress of mine again. She's never mentioned Avellini in my presence again. And I've never brought up the folder because I don't need to. The people who need you small are always keeping a ledger. But so are you. You just keep a quieter one, and you only ever read it aloud once. Here's the thing I've carried out of all of it, and I'll leave it with you plainly because you've earned it. The world will tell you to defend yourself the moment you're disrespected, to match volume with volume. But the people who last, the ones who win the long game, they learn that a truth held calmly is worth more than any truth shouted. Vanessa laughed first at my wedding in front of everyone. I let her. I have never needed to laugh back. If a moment ever comes when you're the quietest person in the room, and someone mistakes it for weakness, remember that stillness is not the same as surrender. Sometimes it's just a woman holding a folder, waiting for the right Sunday. If this story stayed with you, follow the channel and share it with 5 people who need to hear it. Leave a comment about the Vanessa in your own life, and tell me what you did, or wish you'd done. And if you have a title or a story you want to see turned into one of these, put it below. I read them. I'm always looking for the next quiet ledger to read aloud.